Hey everyone, how are you? We're glad to introduce you to our first webinar. It's Erin Sweeney is going to be having a good old chat today about improving operational performance. First of all, welcome everyone. Thank you for dialing in. I hope you're all staying safe during the coronavirus times. It's been a bit wild, but I think as an industry we've been responding quite well, and it's been positive to see, I guess, the rate of response and how agile some of these mining companies have become. So really positive. And I think going forward, business as usual's looking more and more likely. So first off, with I'd like to introduce myself. So I'm Andrew Dittman. I'm the Business Development Manager at MEC Mining. A bit about MEC. So MEC is a mining engineering consultancy. We're based in Queensland as well as WA. We have been around for 15 years, and we typically deal in the operational as well as the standard consultancy, so on-site backfilling of roles, but we also do pre-feasibility studies and optimization studies, scheduling, life and mine planning, all that sort of work. I guess a bit about the presentation format today. So we will be doing the presentation. You guys will all be on mute. There is a Q&A button down the bottom if you haven't found that yet. What we're expecting is people enter questions, and then towards the end I'll be facilitating that, and I'll be asking the questions to Erin, who will give response. I think a little bit about Erin now. So Erin's worked in a variety of commodities across Australia and internationally. These include coal, iron ore, gold and base metals. She has a track record of solving business problems for both underground and open cut mines using data against frameworks in operational and technical services roles. It was her most recent role at a gold mine in WA that really gave her an appreciation for how using operational frameworks to manage data, teamed with management operating systems, can really put runs on the board for operational performance. And without delaying too much longer, Erin, I might hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So I've put together this presentation based on a few things that have informed my career. So some of that's going to be from some studies that I've undertaken, some of it's from experience. But a pulse check on our community at the moment is that we're all sort of struggling with this data management issue around operational performance. So I just sort of wanted to put together a presentation today just to address some of the things that I've seen that have worked really well, some of the traps for young players as well. So let's jump in. So I'll just lead us through why we need to embrace data-driven decisions. So there's a lot of operators out there who like to do things some of the old school ways. And so we'll just create a bit of a burning platform for why they need to get on board with transforming to data-driven decisions rather than sort of operational gut feel decisions. We'll have a look at how to manage data, so some of the must-haves and the non-negotiables. How to set up a data management system so that you're actually drilling down to find the root cause of your issues. Some of the data-driven decisions for continuous improvements that I've seen being made and some that I have personally made. So how do you get your biggest bang for buck? So rather than just spending money on absolutely anything, how do you actually target where your continuous improvement happens so that it actually gives you the most value for what you're actually investing in? And then a little bit around how you can use data for short interval control if you're lucky enough to have some live data coming through, and some management operating systems for tech services planning tools that can help you stay on track live as well. So sort of sitting in the background of everything that I'm going to be talking about today is this idea of a management operating system. So a lot of what we talk about has to be supported by having the right culture or behaviours that sit in a management operating system. So there's really not a lot of point in going on this journey, setting up a data system that nobody really understands and nobody uses. So you really have to make sure that part of the journey includes setting up a really good, strong, solid management operating system to support it, and making sure that you've got the right compliance culture to manage it as well. So if we sort of go back to fundamentals, the goal of an organisation is to make a profit. So that's, you know, revenue minus expenses in the most basic form. There's a lot of really noble things that we do in the mining space, you know, to help out our communities and all our stakeholders. But at the end of the day, if a mine isn't making money, if it's not profitable, then it's going to shut. At least in this country, that's the case. So you've got a couple of levers that you can pull in that space. So you can do more with what you have, or you can, you know, invent more, or find a new way to add on or bolt on, or you can start removing some of the waste from the system. And in an operational setting, a lot of that can sort of look at like dig rates or bench turnover, cycle time, availability, utilisation, managing the quality of your product. And those can be both revenue levers or expense levers. Some of the stuff that sits outside of our control is more in that supply demand market. So the commodity price rises, the availability of really good deposits for us to actually mine as well. So that those are the sorts of things that we can't control, and they're creating this burning platform for us at the moment. So if we have a look at this trend over time for our commodities, we're starting to see that ore grades are really declining over time. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody, but this is what's shaping the reality of mining today. And you throw on top of that an incredibly volatile market with a bunch of black swan events. And we're really mining on what is the economic cusp. So we're going deeper and deeper into underground, more and more expensive methods of mining, and then we're trying to balance that with bulk mining methods. But really, at the end of the day, we have to find a way to mine smarter and manage this excess waste that we haven't had to deal with before. So as our market turns bearish, if you're not actually adopting new trends and new information that's coming in and, you know, really leveraging it in your operations, then you are going to be left behind. You're not going to be a resilient operation. So there absolutely is a case for adopting a data management system. Unfortunately, that means that you find yourself in the age of the smart mine, and I know that this can be a really overwhelming space for a lot of people to be in, particularly if you haven't been trained in any of the elements of this around like coding, all those different types of data management systems. So you'll get 200 emails a day. You've got multiple reports to review. You want to understand how one aspect, say drill and blast, is impacting on your throughput, and there's a lot of data that doesn't naturally overlay itself. But if you embrace this sort of smart mine, then you really will get yourself an advantage on being able to get all of that data into one system, overlay it all, and visualize it appropriately. Handing that over to somebody who sort of sits solely in an IT or a data management space can have its traps and pitfalls. So it's really important that operations take a strong leading role in that space as well. So any basic IT data management company will be able to help you set up a data system, and it will probably look a little bit like this. So you'll have data coming down from cloud sources, some files, some databases. You have the Internet of Things, streaming data through maybe a live network of Wi-Fi on your site, things cycling back and forth. And then they'll move that into sort of a data integration system. So you'll have some sort of common language that you can use to start modeling this data together. And this is sort of where you really need to step in and help manage that process. So you've got to make sure that when that data goes into that system, that you're getting those time usage models and formulas that are right, so that you just have that one source of truth. Because if you have multiple versions of what a time usage model looks like, all you're going to do is end up arguing all day about whose model is right, and it's just a distraction. And then when you move into the data visualization space, you actually want it to be set up really smartly so that it can actually help inform your decisions. So some of the things that you need to do in that space actually link back more closely to how you actually manage your operation on a day-to-day basis, and some of the really effective ways that people have used in operations management, just to drill down to the absolute source of the problem. So at its crux, how do you turn data into performance? Sort of comes back to a couple of different elements. So if we have a look at theory of constraints, this should tell you the capacity of your system. So it's a really great place to start. So if you actually understand what the capacity of your system is, you're kind of almost setting a benchmark. And then you can use this information to build something that's, you know, an overall equipment effectiveness formula, or a maximum sustainable production rate. They can be somewhat interchangeable. So this will actually tell you what you're capable of doing in your system. And at that point, you can start comparing that to the data that's coming in that actually measures your performance. If you apply a framework like root cause analysis and value driver trees that sits on top of that, you can actually start to really drill down into what's the heart of the problem. So there are many bottlenecks and constraints in our systems that stop us on a day-to-day basis. They can move around. They can be anything from, you know, in the quality space, in the quantity space. Maybe it's sitting in your project management, but you really need to get a good understanding on any given day at any point in time, what's actually stopping you from selling more or doing more with what you have, and where is the bottleneck in your systems. So there's going to be a lot of constraints out there. Maybe you have, you know, it's in drill and blast in one day, and maybe it's in load and haul the next day. But you want to get a really good system that's going to help you understand that really quickly so that you can start to get on top of it. So as I said, the first thing you really want to do is understand your system. So if you actually don't understand the capacity of your system, you're in no shape to actually start the improvement process on that. I mean, you can get started, but it's not going to be as intelligent or really hit bang for buck for where your problem areas really are. So in the example that I provided here, this is just basic flow of a value system. So we're starting with some bench prep. So you're sort of estimating how many days it's actually going to take you to get, say, what might be a 50,000 tonne pattern. You can apply this to underground and, you know, certain headings or stopes. So what do you actually need to do to set that up, to make that? How long does that actually take to make that happen? Then you follow through a series of activities that you've got to do along the way. And each of those should actually come back to the same measurement, which is, you know, in this case, how many tonnes per day you actually want to be achieving. And ideally, you'd want a system that adds up to what your demand is. So if you need 100,000 tonnes a day, you want a bench turnover process that produces that much per day. In theory of constraints, your system is actually only as good as the slowest part of that system. So when you add all this up, you're getting to maybe about 5.5 days to turn over a bench pattern, and you're sort of using multiple resources in different areas, and you can maybe, you know, shorten that down. But if you have a closer look at implied utilization, this will really inform you where your biggest constraints or bottlenecks in your system are going to sit. So this is really different from what's a normal utilization would be, and it can exceed 100%. So where you have an implied utilization that sits above 100%, that's the first indicator that you've got a system that's in stress. So what your capability is for that is not actually meeting your demand. It's the first place to go and spend your money or time or resources to have a closer look at it. So in this example, we've got some bench prep that's taking 3 days. So you can actually shorten the bench turnover time by directly addressing that and getting that down to less than a day to make sure that that meets your capacity for the system. So there are a lot of common bottlenecks in our systems, and they'll move around on a day-to-day basis. So some of the stuff that I've seen quite regularly is, you know, running out of drill real estate, putting diggers on standby, not having enough dirt for them to dig. Maybe your system wasn't coordinated, so you hadn't planned ahead well enough, and your surveyor's gone home, but you need a markup for the end of the day, so your digger has to go on standby on foot. Hopefully that's not the case. You could have queuing at the digger or the crusher, bunching of trucks, oversize blocking the crusher. There's actually a lot of places where this bottleneck can show up and move around on any given day. So this is really an example of how these case can build up to lose time and money. So this is a very achievable plan. However, and what you're actually seeing is it's in that sort of a Gantt chart format. So where it's blue, that's what you had planned to do at the time. Where it's green, you'll see that's where you actually did what you said you were going to do. And where it's red, that's where you've mined in an area that you were actually supposed to be mining in, but you haven't because of some constraint or a bottleneck within the system. And effectively what happened in this example is that over time, we lost about 3 weeks worth of mining. So that's a lot of time and money that can add up. And you really need to get on top of that pretty much straight away. So you have to understand what's happening in your system. So why would we use something like overall equipment effectiveness? Basically, this is a measure of how well your operation is utilized. So how you're using the asset. And yeah, you want to compare it to its full potential when you're actually measuring your compliance on a daily basis, or your overall performance. So basically, it's a scorecard, and in this example, so we have availability, which is a proxy for utilization, made up of planned availability and unplanned utilization of availability. Then you've got a performance metric as well, so that's going to be something that like tons per hour or cycle times or those kinds of things. And you can have a quality component. Some of these things are a little bit interchangeable in this OEE formula. It was set up for a classic manufacturing standard, but you can actually apply it to the mining environment. And a lot of companies are actually using maximum sustainable production rate to get a better understanding of that. So you can link that quality component back to, I guess, payload data or some other element that might be more relevant to your site. So when it comes to the root cause analysis, so this is just basically a really systematic process for identifying root causes for your problems. And the best way to display that I have seen to date is to have a look at a value driver tree. So a value driver tree is basically designed to set up for you to understand, if you sort of follow that basic formula, a tree that links back to the key activities that actually drive the value or drive that productivity performance. And you can create metrics for those within that tree that will help you understand how that's performing over time. So if we have a look at what we used to deal with, so this is an example of a report that I was used to getting on a daily basis maybe 5 years ago. It's just a daily report card that tells you what you did, and it's effectively compliance to plan. It was built out of spreadsheets, and in this case, the site was doing really well. But I don't recall a lot of people asking, what did we do so well that day? What was actually driving that performance on that day? There wasn't a lot of drill down to understand, can we actually use this to make a better plan and to continually improve our production. With the onset of data just streaming in live and all the sensors that we have, it's really possible now for us to get to the heart of what's actually driving performance in our organisation, to either learn from it and continue to do it really well, or learn from it and to improve on what was maybe some subpar performance. So one of the first pieces of advice that I would give any organisation is to just start investing in a platform that will allow you to coordinate that data into that one space. And there's a lot of IT people out there and businesses that can help you do this. Some of the best ones that I've seen are OneView, Power BI, MinView, Azure DevOps from Microsoft as well. There's a lot of other systems out there. There's basically a product on the market for your budget and size and scale of your operation. So there's a lot of people out there already working in this space that can help you with this. So ideally, you'd probably want to have something like some dispatch data coming in, some mine planning data that might be sitting in sort of a database or an Excel format, some equipment sensor data that's coming in live, maybe some safety data. But you want to get into that one platform so that you can start to be able to overlay data and really start to get an impact on what's driving different values within your system. And once again, make sure that you have all of those models or your time usage models or all of your other formulas so that you just have one source of truth, because you can waste a lot of time arguing about which metric is correct. So this is a really great example from a site that I've worked with before. And it's a little overwhelming at first, but up the top you sort of have what would be your classic compliance to plan. So how did we go against what we said we were going to do today? But if you have a look at the section below that, it's actually just giving you just a little bit more information. This is where this OEE or MSPR data is coming through. So it tells you what you actually did today, but then it also rates the system based on its capacity or its capability to perform or deliver a certain amount of tons or BCMs, whichever you choose to measure. And it tells you exactly where in that process that you lost that volume. So you can start to actually drill down and get a really good feel for where this performance didn't go so well. So in this case, there's two primary ones that sort of stand out to me here, that there's some sort of loss in some rate, or there's some sort of loss in some utilization. So what some of those value drivers we want to have a closer look at. So we go down, we sort of drill down to the next level. So you can typically with a Power BI, you should be able to click on the next page or on a button on the screen that would sort of take you to something that's at that next level. So once again, this is where the value driver tree really comes in and hits it home. So you can actually start to break that overall performance metric and where you've lost the tons, BCMs, and really get a better understanding of which parts of the system are actually driving this. And as you can see, the utilization component was largely driven by utilization of availability here. But if it wasn't that, you could break it down and have a closer look at, you know, what's happening in my cycle time. So there's maybe a slight reduction in cycle time, and that might be due to a slow full haul or maybe some issues with your queuing. So you can really start to break it down and get a closer look on that. And if you've got your data set up right, you should be able to take this once again to the next level. So already within 1 minute, we've been able to get to the point where we can start to really understand what's actually driven our performance in the last 24, 30 days, 60, 90 days. You can set up your data for any of those time frames. So this is just another example, once again, of you know, this being applied to. The first example was for trucks. This one's for excavators. But as I said, this can be applied to almost any piece of equipment that you have on site. And you can just start to drill down and understand what actually drives that piece of equipment to perform and where it fell short on a given day, so that you can really start to get in and target those key areas that are not allowing you to perform. So if we go back to the truck example, what we're saying here is an understanding of the utilization of this truck, its availability utilization, and where we've actually lost time on that. And we can see there's probably a significant amount of time lost in standby, and then when we have a look at our standby codes, we can start to get a feel that there was no operator available. Perhaps there were some weather delays. Did we handle our shift changeover, crib changeover very well? What's actually happening at our crusher? So the Pareto analysis allows you to really get to the heart of the issue really quickly and get a better understanding of what's actually driven your performance that day. And once again, this is really great information, but you have to be able to do something with that. So this is where your continuous improvement starts to kick in, and you can start designing projects to address these key issues. So if we have a closer look at digger performance, you can get the same thing again, and you can have a look at multiple different diggers that you may have in your system. Maybe it's just one, and you can start to see that perhaps maybe our crib handover hasn't been going as smoothly as what it possibly could. We're spending a lot of time in cleanup space. So what projects do we need to look at addressing? If we've got these as longer term trends, what do we need to address that is going to help us manage that over time? Say it wasn't on those sort of metrics, and maybe you had some cycle time impactors, you should be able to drill down to one of those as well. So this one's sort of overlaying your excavator availability codes, and then you can have a look at how your trucks have been bunching up and moving over time. So we call that middle graph a picket fence diagram. So it's just the longer the trucks bunched up over time. So the longer the trucks are bunched up, that sort of tells you that you've got too much bunching happening in your system. And there's areas or times in there that you can sort of correlate with, obviously your digger downtime and how well you're responding to moving your trucks on after a digger goes down to bringing them back onto the cycle. So you can start to get some really good information about what's happening in your operation. And then on the bottom there, you can see we've overlaid some of that with some dig rates as well to really understand the impact of these stop-start cycles, bunching and whatnot on our dig rates. And you can effectively do this for almost any metric that you want to be having a look at that drives the value in the business. So once again, we've got some truck cycle time analysis, and we can see you can measure queue, hang, spot, loading times, and you can break that down to an individual piece of equipment or even to an operator at that level. So the data that's coming in is so powerful that you can now create a performance feedback scorecard for your operators to help them improve their performance and benchmark them against who's best in the business. And if you take that one step further, then you can start to enable some training programs for those people as well. So you can pick who's doing really well in that operator space against somebody who needs a little bit more help, and you've got a really good for information data that informs where they need help as well. So as I said, you can start to have a closer look and manage, how your payload is performing over time, maybe against different geologies, how that's changing with time. Is there anything that you need to adjust in your reconciliation processes? So it can be really powerful if you set it up correctly with the right sort of visualization tools and drill down, and using that value driver tree is probably the best example that I've seen of a lot of sites on how to actually manage your data to get to the root heart of the problem. So some of the projects that are undertaken that have used this kind of data drill down process to really understand and drive improvements, as sort of identified where roads needed to be changed. There were some issues on cycle time, traffic management plans, optimizing dump locations, operator feedback reports, as we've said before. We had one where we had a go line that got moved. Some new rules for start and end of shift, or just some more effective practices around those periods of times that really caused a lot of operational sort of standby delays. Drill and blast optimization was a really great one that we had a closer look at as well. So when you have a closer look at what's the right graphic for the kind of information that you're looking at, so it's really important to select a good graphic so that you can really get to the heart of the problem quite quickly. I found waterfalls are absolutely useful, where you have sort of buckets of information that sort of tell you loss and gains, and then you can use that Pareto to help you sort of work out where in the system or where in that bucket you have the majority of the problem. So it really helps you get to the heart of that problem. Bar charts are really great for comparing different data over time. Line charts for establishing trends over time. So your average IT person will be able to help you sort of work out what is the best way of displaying data, but you sort of just want to have a think about what actually prioritizes the issue for me, so that it really stands out, jumps out and grabs me when I just have to look at it. So as we've said before, there's so much data that comes your way that you need to find a way to cut through all that noise and get to the heart of the problem. Just a little piece on short interval control. If you're fortunate enough to have this live data streaming in, then you can start to set up some metrics on some dashboards, and these can be actually Wi-Fi enabled onto tablets and to phones that your pit supervisors might have in the pit, or within their offices, so that they can start to keep an eye throughout the day on what compliance that they're actually getting to their plan throughout the day. So what metrics are they getting? So if you get those key performance indicators sitting on that dashboard, so these leading indicators for performance, that enables them to track over the day what's actually going wrong out there in the field, so they can go and target that specific area, get on top of that performance, because why wait? Why wait for tomorrow when you can do something about it right now? So it just enables you to become more efficient and effective at getting on top of your game there. Another tool that we found, which is probably less about data, but really about more engaging that culture of compliance, is the pre and post mortem. And this is really recommended for anybody who's done anything in the project management space would understand this. But really, it's just about understanding, you know, what are we up against today, and what did we, you know, making sure that that handover is really effective. And probably one of the most powerful questions that you can ask, you know, when you're setting up for the day, is what do I actually need from my tech services team? So, you know, asking for things sporadically throughout the day can often lead to some of these delays that we've talked about before, with people not showing up at the right place at the right time to keep the operation running on. So I guess we'll talk about some of the tools that you can use to understand what's coming down the pipeline towards you coming up next. But these are really important things for you to have those conversations with your technical teams as well. So this is basically an example of a living Gantt chart that will help you to stay on plan. So we call this one the worm, but effectively it's just an understanding of what needs to happen on a pattern on any given day. So each line equates to a pattern, and each color along that bar chart equates to a different area of operation. So you have maybe green for drill and blast, blue for mining, red for load and fire, and maybe you've got some other colours in there to correspond to maybe some geology or drilling that needs to happen, some other tech services tasks that might need to happen. You can set it up so that it's a rolling plan, so that you can actually understand what you should be doing today, or what's on the cards for you today, and what's coming down the pipeline for you. So if you display these prominently around your main meeting rooms and your work areas, then you've got an easy reference point, so you don't always have to go back and, you know, check through plans and this and that. You've got a live piece of information that tells you who's working on what and where they should be and what's coming to you next. And that can be linked back to a Kanban board. And this is an example of their Azure DevOps Kanban board. And effectively, each of these columns is an activity that happens in that value chain of the mining cycle. And you can place a card in that. It's going to be some very consistent things that need to happen as you're turning over a bench or a tunnel or a stope or whatever it might be. And each of those you can place a card in each of those activities that defines the specific piece of dirt that you might be mining on that day. So for this case, it's a pattern ID. And that card can be moved along each bucket, and these things are smart enough that they can feed back to that live Gantt chart, but it can also send a notification to the person who's next going to receive that activity. So as each card gets moved along, either by you ticking off, yes, I've done that, and it gets moved along to the next person, you can set up all kinds of warning systems that get generated that help the next person in line understand that this task is now going to be their problem that's coming to them next, and they have something that they have to do. Then you can take that once again to the next level and start to coordinate who's doing what different tasks. And this is sort of just looking at the same information, but I guess from a more managerial perspective. So for me, this was really useful for me to understand who in my team was working on what was getting behind. So you can see there's some red tasks there that aren't getting done. So you can immediately jump in, have a look at those, and you can go straight to the heart of the problem. So what isn't getting done? Who might be overloaded? So who's got a lot of tasks and activities? So do I have to start moving some resources in my team around to help cope with the flow of work that's coming to that team? And what have we actually prioritized for the day? So you can get a really good look in one small screenshot of what's actually happening within your team and whether or not things are working the way that they're supposed to. It takes a bit of time to get these things up and running, but once they are so incredibly powerful for helping your team stay on track and focused on what's most important. So there's a lot of work that people can be doing, but if they're not working on the thing that's most important, that keeps that throughput pumping through, then you haven't got an efficient operation. And tech services teams working together with mine operation teams is a very important part of that. So these are really great collaboration tools that hold a high level of accountability for your team as well. So one of the things that we see most common is when we're trying to implement a new system into pretty much any site, doesn't have to be in mining, is only about 25% of them actually come on time, on budget, and are adopted. 75% of them actually aren't working or encounter a lot of problems, and certainly I have had my fair share of that as well. I would say the best framework for helping kick that off and get that underway has to be Cotys Framework. So it's an 8-step change model. So basically, it sort of starts at the bottom where you know you want to make a change, but you have to create this sense of urgency. So this is your burning platform. So why do we need to change? And you know, if you've done your capacity map and you know what you can do, then that's a really great place to start to create that burning platform. There's so much lost opportunity that can be identified through that capacity map. I guess the next thing is sort of having a look at forming this powerful coalition, and some of the best advice that that sits in this space is actually look for the people who really love and embrace change, the early adopters, because if you get them on board first, they can start to sort of create that, I guess, infectious pull power from the rest of the team by being really excited about the change that's coming. And when you create that vision and you're communicating the vision, you're slowly pulling more and more people along that distribution into the people who are actually really willing to make that change in the culture that needs to happen to get this underway. Focus on some really quick wins up front, because they're going to be the things that really get the buy-in from the rest of the team, the laggards, the people who don't want change, who really resist it. And they are in your organisation, and they could be anything from 25 to 10% sort of sitting in that range at different levels of compliance. But if you're starting to create those quick wins and people are actually saying that this thing actually has a lot of power and sitting behind it, then you start to get that contagious effect that you need to really kick this thing into gear. And once it's up and running, don't let it die. You've got to really embed that practice in your organisation, make it BAU, create processes and systems around it, keep the discipline in there, bring it into all of your meetings, make it something that you're talking about every day and you're referencing these different things. Give it some funny names like the worm so that everybody knows exactly what it is and what's expected of them when they're going in and having a look for these things as well. So that's basically, I guess, the journey that I have personally been on for, embedding new data. It certainly wasn't an easy journey, and we made a lot of mistakes along the way. But as we've gone through that, I guess those are the best practices that I have seen put into place, and they're the ones that I would recommend that any organisations that's starting out on this journey start to embrace. So I guess going back to you, Andrew, what have we got in the questions space?
No, that was good, Erin. Thanks for that. I might kick one off that I have here, and I'll kick into the other questions. What if you've got a site which has got next to no data collection or very poor data collection? What would you do in that space?
Yeah, so they're obviously not going to get as powerful a journey as something that's coming through in automation. But if you're still collecting data on a daily basis, the best thing that you can do is make sure that you're cleaning and processing that data as quickly as possible. So if you have trucks calling into dispatch and they're sort of logging that data live, or if you've got truckies sort of logging it at the end of the day on just like a tally sheet, and then that's coming in, get the discipline around turning that data in and cleaning that data as quickly as what you possibly can to generating some of these reports. And you can collect that data. You can get the drilling data from your drillers and the pen rates and the like, and you can get that basic data that builds up some of these value chains. You may not necessarily be able to get right down to that finite detail where some of your sensor data collects, but it's definitely a great place to start. And I think, in my experience, the people who suffer the most are the ones who aren't cleaning the data and then turning it around as quickly as what they possibly can so they can actually use it to inform a better decision faster.
Yep. We have a question here from Ahmad. How do high cost producers increase their profit when there's so many operational costs?
Yeah, once again, this is about being efficient. So there's a lot of waste that can go into your systems, and when you have a look at that value tree, you can use it in two ways. You can see where you might have too much redundancy. So, for example, if you're overperforming in an operation and you're pumping the tons out, and all they're doing is sitting on a ROM where you have to rehandle them all the time, then you probably have a little bit of redundancy in your system, and you can start to park up some trucks or have a look at those other cost saving elements. But really you need to understand what is driving the value in your system, what your capacity is, where you have too much, where you have too little, and reassign resources around that so you can stay disciplined about what you're actually needing to achieve for the day.
Yep, right, yeah. One from Jacob. So interested to know how estimated times to complete tasks, projects and plans were for the tech services for the Kanban/tracking systems.
Yeah, so a lot of that is based on experience, or perhaps the volume of a pattern that needs to be turned over. So you should have a really good understanding. If you're doing short-term planning, you should already have a really good understanding of how much time it sort of takes to do these things. And it doesn't have to be perfect when you first start out. You just put an estimation in there, and over time you'll find that will either, you know, shrink or increase to the size of what it actually is. But in doing that alone, it puts a spotlight on the things that are taking too long. So where the system's falling over. So if you've got, say, a great example is a driller dying to get onto a pattern and it hasn't been signed off by a drill and blast engineer, them knowing 2 or 3 days ahead of time, or even that whole drilling process has moved along much faster, helps them to reprioritize what it is that they need to start working on. So hopefully you've got your whole plan working for you in the first place, but mapping out, you know, what would be reasonable timeframes for your Kanban board or your worm initially, and then making that go live and tracking where it's moving in the wrong direction is really important.
Yep. What level of resourcing is required to run a data collection system, setting up reports, scrubbing data, and analyzing the information, and who actually owns the system typically? Is it tech services or operations?
It depends on the complexity of the system. So typically I would say operational data is owned by operations. So through my career, I've seen tech services are accountable for producing a plan, and operations are accountable for actioning that plan. So I guess the operations own the outcome, but it's a collaboration. They all need to work together. Most commonly, a dispatch team would be running the manual collection of data, but it'd be sitting it back in there supported by an IT service, particularly if it's really automated, to process and cleanse that data as you're going through. But it all comes down to operational discipline to call in the right code at the right time, or to log the right code. And some of that accountability sits in that supervisor space to make sure that their people are actually doing the right thing when they're actually recording data, and they're consistently recording the right information. So I guess there's, you could probably do yourself up a little racy to understand the flow of data and who owns what. That's probably what I would recommend you do. And I guess some of those things really feed into why you need a really good management operating system to support this, because people need to understand in this system what their role is, what they're accountable for, what they're expected to deliver, so that it works appropriately, and then making sure that we're holding them to account to that as well.
Yep. One from Jonathan McPherson. So, Erin, can you please touch on changing culture and some of the key methods in bringing those who don't have experience in the area into, i.e. the superintendents and whatnot, to get comfortable and bring them on board in the process?
Yeah, culture change is probably one of the hardest things to initiate in any organisation. So if you actually don't have the training in that, then I would strongly recommend that you go out and get some leadership training, so you actually understand, how to influence your own team and other people as well. But beyond that, you probably want to be guided by somebody this is their bread and butter. So you might have a business improvement team already within your organisation that has some of these skill sets. But yeah, effectively it'll come back to some good leadership practices, understanding, I guess, the psychology of your people, what gets them on board, and that's going to sit a lot in creating the why. Why do I have to do this? What's in it for me? And the burning platform for why it's such an important change that needs to happen. So yeah, if you don't personally have the training skills, then invest in them, particularly in the leadership space, and then maybe bring on somebody who has experience in doing change management as well. But there's a lot of frameworks, and you can get out. I think we might have frozen you, did I?
Yeah, sorry. How do you see the integration and increased use of data in the fields of AI and automation changing the way mining is carried out in the future? It's from Nick Hunt Davies.
So I guess a lot of this stuff is going to be somewhat automated. So the more sensors you have, the more, I guess, accurate or clean your data is. Whenever you've got that human element that comes into sort of trying to make a decision, you start to get a bit of ambiguity in your data. So if you start to take, I guess, some of that human judgment out and just follows a series of rules, then the data is likely to get cleaner and cleaner with time. AI, obviously, you know, the faster or more intelligently we can collect data to make decisions, the better it's going to be. So I see AI being incredibly important to the future of mining, particularly when you consider that baseline burning platform. So the more competitive we get, the more volatile our commodity prices are, and we're looking at a bearish sort of market right now. You really need a competitive advantage in being able to get to the heart of your problems straight away.
Yep. From Patrick Enright, given the higher cost of implementing a data collection and management system, particularly within underground mining, what would be your advice for selling the relatively intangible or hidden benefits?
Sorry, could you repeat that one for me again?
So given the higher cost of implementing a data collection and management system, particularly within underground mining, what would be your advice for selling the relatively intangible or hidden benefits?
Yeah, once again, you don't actually have to invest in that platform straight away. I would start with your capability or your capacity map. So go back to the very first principles of operations management, that theory of constraint. So if you don't understand your system and what it's capable of, you'll have no idea where the improvement can come from. So if you can find in your capacity map where those first likely wins are going to be, when you're starting to collect that data, you can start to build a business case, because you've got a known ton or volume quantity that is associated with your ore in that volume that will then immediately generate increased revenue. So it can be very easy to build that first business case to get that data system in place. If you really understand your system, you really have to understand it well, though.
Yep. I've got another one from Ahmad. So is there any professional development initiatives I can take to keep up to date with modern technology? And are there any online certifications or courses that you would recommend?
I think if you can do anything that helps you to understand some of these integration platforms, then you're going to have a significant advantage over other mining engineers, for example. So if you can wrangle a Power BI visualization, architecture and the coding that sits in behind that, then you can start to build some of these value driver trees. That's obviously going to be a huge advantage. One of the things I don't think that is taught very well at university is sort of sits in that operations management, and a lot of the times mining engineers are making decisions in ops management. So understanding some of the basic frameworks that sit in behind operations management that drive value would be a huge advantage as well.
One from Angus. So he's had trouble with data indicating issues too late. Have you got any tips on how he can get into the issues early before they really become issues?
Once again, I guess that comes to you got to watch these trends over time. So it's probably you look at the time horizon. So is this a reoccurring trend that you need a project for, or can you implement short interval control? Do you have live data to actually get on top of any issues that are slowly emerging throughout a day? And once again, if you have a really effective management operating system, you're going to understand your system and know what drives the value and know what good looks like. So you're going to be able to get on top of it. And that's probably as relevant if you don't have short interval control as well, because you'll know, you know, what is driving issues inside your operations. So hanging queue, bunching of trucks, all those kinds of things. So if you actually understand that capacity of your system, you're going to understand or be able to really quickly see where you have a problem if you just go for a drive around the pit as well.
Yep. From Joanna, what planning programs work best to compare planned activities with actual? And can the real-time data be integrated back into said planning program to be viewed in Gantt chart view?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Azure DevOps is probably the one that I have used that pretty much does that really well. So I've seen, you know, a plan be generated in something such as, you know, Exactor or perhaps Elastri or some similar sort of program. You can export that out and then import it if you really know how to code well in that Azure DevOps space into that sort of program, and that starts to auto-generate all those little cards that I'm talking about, and that system is self-fulfilling then. You can can generate all kinds of information from that, such as, you know, how many tasks you have outstandings, who's getting the hot potato next, and Gantt that out, what's ahead or behind. You can generate almost any data you like out of some planning data. And what you want to do is have that in that same language as what your live data coming in or your actual data coming in looks like as well. And that's where having that integrated package system really works. So work really closely with the IT team that is setting up your data system. Tell them what you want, and you know, it's got to be a really strong collaboration for you guys to get it off the ground.
Yep. No worries. I did just see a question come in. Will there be a recording of this? There will be, and we'll be sending a link out after this, so you can share it around to your teams. One here from Claude. So my question is based on trying to get the same truth of the model and formula used. Do you end up using one source of data collection for the analysis, and some systems don't have a capability gathering everything you need? What do you do in that case?
I mean, at the end of the day, you just got to do the best you can with what you've got. But these systems are getting more and more intelligent. So just keep one eye on a market for something that's probably going to be in your budget range, that's going to be able to help you do that. But yeah, look, there's no silver bullet with this. It's, you know, probably some of it's about the data. A lot of it's actually about the behaviors as well. So you got to, I guess, create that the environment where collecting and processing data is, and the discipline about action is just as important as the data that's coming in as well.
Yeah, and there's probably almost a follow-up question to that, is how do you ensure the accuracy of the data?
Yeah, that's discipline. Over time, like I can't count how many meetings I've been in where we've been looking at the data and like, oh, that doesn't seem right. And over time, if you continue to apply discipline to it, and you know, you're following up and holding people accountable for entering the data, over time you'll get compliance to, you know, the correct data being entered at the right time. Maybe from time to time there might be a glitch in the system, but look, I'll be honest, most of the time that the data's been wrong is because somebody didn't enter it incorrectly. So having really stringent practices around processing that data, rules for entering it, making it really clear about what a code is, what's inside, you know, what's in it, what's out of it. Those are really important elements of it. And if you've got that management operating system discipline driving this in the background, it's going to be a huge element of success in making sure that your data actually looks really good.
Yep. One from Oscar. I found it challenging to transform the operational culture and move the people to use data analytic reports instead of spreadsheets. Do you have any experiences or recommendations?
Yeah, I guess you could walk them through a process much like this, but the biggest tool or the biggest reason somebody has to change is if there's something in it for them. So if they've got to be constantly updating or referencing a spreadsheet, as opposed to opening something and just being able to click a couple of buttons to drill down into what is the heart of their problem, and they actually understand how that data, that whole value driver tree works. Because sometimes these platforms can look really scary at first, and if you're not used to dealing with data, you're going to have to train people in how to recognize these trends or to interpret the data as it's coming through. It takes time. As I said, try and get the early adopters on board first, because they're going to be the ones who actually really want to go through on that journey. Then over time, when you get those small wins, then everybody else slowly comes on board. You're always going to have a couple of laggards who, you can't please absolutely everybody, but they'll be left behind, and everybody else will be up and running this system, and they'll have no choice but to adapt to it as well. But as I said, change management is incredibly difficult, and it sits largely in that, understanding the psychology of your organisation space. So you can start to see that to do something like this actually involves a lot of different elements. You've got like a HR element, you've got an IT element, you've got an operations management element. So there's a lot of different components that will help get this off the ground. So it can't be done by one person. You kind of need this coalition of people to help you go on that journey.
Yep. From Dudding is, what's the best way to know production achievement compared to cost efficiency in real-time basis?
So if you actually understand the value drivers of your organisation, so maybe if your OR bands are particularly important, you can sort of rejig your OEE or MSPR formulas so that those things actually stand out a little bit more, and you can assign a value to those. But I would say some of that sort of links back to what are you actually doing to define what is and is not OR in your system. So having a look at maybe some of that Ken Lane methodology on how you're defining what is and is not OR. And then making sure that your value driver tree actually picks up, when you're moving that volume as well, so you can assign a dollar value. So if you want to see that structured into your data, have a chat with your IT person or whoever's sort of wrangling this data for you into a visual capacity, and they can help you work out a way to get that dollar value on there as well. It's really about how you structure that data.
Got a geotech question here from Claude. So coming from a geotechnical background as yourself, where does this fit in data collection? I've hardly seen areas where this is factored in. Is there anything you are planning on doing or to address this as well?
Geotech's absolute guns at collecting data. It absolutely informs every single decision that they make. Geotechs do nothing but data-driven decision making on a daily basis. So whether that's wall movement data that's coming in, watching for trends over time, analysing what's happening in the grounds, reconciling designs. It's probably the thing that kicked me off to best understand how to measure, manage, visualize data is being a geotech. You can't be a geotech if you're not invested in looking at your data.
Yeah. Just in the interest of time, I might sum things up here. Thanks again, Erin. That was awesome. I think you've answered majority of the questions that came through. There was definitely a flurry that came through at the end there. Good turnout too. We had 51 people show up in the end. So thanks everyone for joining. Once again, we will be sending out the link and answering any of these questions that came through that we missed via email. So thanks, Erin, and thanks everyone for joining. Cheers.
Thanks,